Welcome back to another episode of the Watch Us Thrive podcast. This is your girl, Leanne. And we have a very different episode coming today. Before I hit the record button, I was telling our guest that I'll introduce to you in a second that this is something that is so rampant in society. This is something that a lot of people, not me, I do not have this lived experience, but there's a lot of people who deal with religious abuse. Yeah. Yeah, we're going there today, ladies and gentlemen. And I just really appreciate Carla, welcome to the show, for wanting to come on and share her story of dealing with religious abuse. She dealt with, gaslighting. She dealt with stalking, sexual harassment from a fellow congregant. She dealt with a lot of shit in the church. And I think church hurt, church abuse is something that we do not talk about enough. It's something that a lot of y'all will probably be able to relate to regardless of, the religious organization that you follow. Me, I'm not a religious person. I'm just going to put that out there now. I believe in God. I believe in a higher power. Jesus is my homeboy, and I pray, right? But when it comes to organized religion, that's something that I just can't get jiggy with, right? And we're going to get into that with today's conversation. But before we even dive deep into a very taboo topic, welcome Carla to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Hello, Leanne. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for everyone who is listening. I'm already feeling my heart racing, but like you said, this is like a hush hush topic. So I'm excited that we're going to have an important conversation. I might have to pause along the way.
That's fine. And I totally welcome that. This is your lived experience. And I'm gonna share in the episode show notes. She talked about her entire disaffiliation from Mormonism, which is the religion that she grew up in, the Mormon church, on episode 18 of her podcast. She is a podcaster, the First Gen Coach podcast. We're gonna get into that too. But if y'all want to hear like the full in-depth story, go listen to that episode because we're not going to do that here. I want to be able to promote your podcast as well and have people really listen to, that episode was a lot. I did not finish it, but there was a lot that you talked about that I was just like, holy shit, I can't believe you experienced that. So I just want to give you your flowers and I want to thank you for wanting to come on and share your story. Take as much time as you need. I know this is a heavy topic, like I said in the intro, but like this is something that too many people are suffering in silence about, right? So I would love for you to kind of talk about, your upbringing, your family, childhood, what that kind of looked like for you, especially being raised in a home that was practicing Mormonism.
Sure thing. So, a little bit about me. So, my name is Carla Santamaria, as you said before, and I was born in Honduras. Born in Honduras, moved to Miami right before I turned 9. So, I I will be referring to like the Mormons. All right, that is like the nicest way that I can say it throughout this episode. So, the Mormons came to knocked on my family's door. Actually, before I was born. Now that I think about it, my mom joined the church in her teenage years. Married my dad, they left, but when I was a kid, somehow the Mormons found us again. So that's when I rejoined the church. I was like 5 or 6. And that's when the Mormons found us. That's when we started, that's when I became Mormon. My parents, like this was the church, taking us to church every Sunday. So I was Mormon in Honduras, moved to the United States, still was Mormon here in South Florida, very strict religious upbringing. So think about the the strictness that comes with parents who fled Honduras because of the gang violence that resulted from US interventionism in Latin America. So like there's that strict, gotta shelter my girls, so I'm one of four. And I'm one of four girls. And so that strict, kind of like basically refugee upbringing mixed in with this idea that Mormonism, like the world is scary. You're God's chosen people. You have to do the right thing. I mean, like I was so Mormon. Like I know that sounds like really silly, but I really, really was like super into it. Like people would tell me, like Carla, like you really know that the church is true, and that's why like I go into like and as I mentioned in my podcast, I go into that whole thing about how disaffiliating from the faith of my upbringing was heartbreaking because I truly believed it. Like, I really felt like the world was getting like taken out from underneath. But like, this is how Mormon I was. We went to early morning seminary, which is basically like Bible study at 6 a.m. in high school. All right. And yeah, exactly. Exactly. Like, as someone
If
who's
you
like,
guys can see my face, I'm like, whoa, 6 a.m. as a teenager. Jesus Christ.
yes. And like already teenagers is a public health crisis that they're not getting enough sleep. So that was Monday through Friday, right? On Wednesday nights, we had mutual, which was like, I don't know, like religious activity for the youth. And then on Sundays, we had like a 3 hour church block. Sometimes there was activities after church. And Saturdays, sometimes there was events. So like even when I was super Mormon, I remember thinking, wow, like I go to church a lot. Like there's weeks that I go to church like every single day. So like I was aware of that, like I was super aware of that. And when you're Mormon, like you're just raised to see the world in a very specific way. And there's like a level of arrogance that I didn't realize until after I had this affiliated. But anyway, like if you can just think of like going to church every almost Monday through Friday in high school and on the weekends, sometimes also on Saturday as well, like religion was a major part of my life growing up.
I have a question because, like I said before we recorded, I'm very ignorant when it comes to Mormonism. I don't know anything about it. I grew up, I don't want to say I grew up in a Christian home, but Christianity was what my parents practiced until they didn't anymore. But Christianity was, the theme in my family. So you said Mormonism has this really specific outlook on life. Can you explain to someone like me who has no idea what that looks like? Like, what is it that you guys really, not you, but what is it that you did believe in when you were practicing?
Of course. So the first thing I want to say is that my programming, even though I left the church like 7-ish years ago now, I'm still like about to recite the articles of faith, los artículos de fe, in both English and Spanish.
Wow.
like that's how Mormon I was, that I was
Yeah.
forced to memorize these like 13 things. So let me see. So the Mormons believe, they believe in God, the Father, in his son, Jesus Christ, and in the Holy Ghost. And I'm not going to do a PSA for Mormonism, so I'm not actually
No,
going to
no, no. This
recite.
ain't that. You can Google that,
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah, I'm not gonna. This is like my straight A student coming in. It's
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, but yeah. So basically, like the Mormons believe that like there's God the Father, then there's His Son Jesus Christ, and then there's the Holy Ghost. That they are three separate entities. I think what sets apart Mormonism from like regular, I guess, Christianity is that they believe that Joseph Smith was the prophet of God during the 1800s. God the Father and Jesus Christ the Son appeared to the prophet Joseph and said, like, you need to restore my church. So the Mormons really believe that the Mormon church is the restored church of God as it was in biblical times, and
Right.
that it was lost and now it's back. And so that's kind of like the doctrinal foundation. Basically, like ours is the only true church. Everybody
Yeah.
else's church is wrong. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
like the underlying arrogance.
Yeah.
And then there's, kind of like you believe that like you need to get married in the temple. So the temple is like extra holy church. And you are married for time and eternity, so obviously like marriage is between a man and a woman because that is what the Mormons teach. And then you have children and, like you'll be married in eternity as well. So
Got it.
only if you're good and you get into heaven though, because Mormons also believe in like multi-level heaven. Like
Right,
there's
right, right,
different levels of
right.
heaven. So yeah,
That's another story for another day. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Let me ask you this boldly, and if this offends anyone, sorry, not sorry. This is my podcast. I'm going to ask what I want. Do you feel like it was a sense of like a cult, if you will?
I did not feel that when I was a Mormon. And
Okay.
I actually, I remember having a conversation. Was I like graduating from college or something like that? And I was having a conversation with someone who was like, Carla, I'm really glad I met you because even though I still don't believe in Mormonism, at least I know you guys are not a cult. Fast
Hmm.
forward a couple of years later, I was in like their holy temple doing weird as fuck rituals and like chanting that I promised to give all of my everything to the Mormon church. And I remember I was sitting in the back of this room and people were like, if you see my hands, they're like moving up and like moving kind of down. And I don't remember what I was saying, but I remember sitting in the back thinking, huh, this is why people think we're a cult. And so
Mm.
like the awareness, it was like almost there. Most
Yeah,
that
yeah,
was
yeah,
yeah, like almost there.
yeah.
Growing up, it didn't feel like a cult. And towards the end of my time, I was like, oh, this is why other people who are totally wrong and don't know any better think we're a cult.
Right,
But
right.
now that I'm out of it, yeah, it's 100% a cult.
Yeah, yeah. I figured, but I wanted to get the answer from someone who's been in it, not being someone on the outside who's just looking like, that's kind of fucking weird, but okay, go off. But yeah, I mean, I appreciate the candidness that you're bringing to this conversation, and that brings me to the next part that, again, I know this is very triggering. It's not easy to listen to, talk about, but this is your lived experience, and we have uncomfortable conversations on the Watch Us Thrive podcast so people can feel less alone in their own experience. So, in the bio that you put in, you were dealing with abuse, religious abuse, and you were being stalked and harassed by a fellow congregant. And that was being aided and abetted by the group, the Mormon church that you were dealing with. So, talk a little bit about that experience and what you were dealing with.
Sure thing. So the year was 2017. No, I'm just kidding. But it was 2017. I
Yeah.
was yeah. So one of the things that I think is relevant here is that the way that the Mormon churches are organized, it's almost like school districts. Like if you live in this area, you go to this school. Similarly, with the Mormon church, if you live in this area, you go to this congregation.
Mhm.
And so I was, and they have a special mini cult group for the young single adults. That's what I was in. And
Mm.
so yes, it was 2017. And I remember it was May. And the reason that I remember that it was May is because I was about to start grad school that summer or something. And like this new guy moved into the area. And immediately he made me uncomfortable. He was just like so I'm not necessarily short, like I'm 5'6" and I got some meat on my bones, so I'm not like a tiny person, but this man still was like towering over me. And he's very large, so like I don't often feel like a small person, but I remember feeling just like physically unsafe because he was so
Mm.
big and like standing too close.
Mhm.
And I remember the first thing that happened, which was like minor, quote unquote, was that I was talking to him, and he was like, well, he was talking to me. I was trying to get away. And there was a group of the guys, like the priesthood, because the Mormons believe that men have the priesthood. So it was like the group of the men there. And they were watching me, and they were watching me be so uncomfortable. Like they were having their little conversation and they were watching me be uncomfortable. And like they didn't step in. And I remember thinking, like, these guys have zero idea what it's like to have like bystander intervention. Like I am here very uncomfortable because this man is all up in my personal space. And so
Visibly uncomfortable.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Eventually, another one of the women in the congregation came by, saw it, and she was like, Carla, can you come with me for a second? Kind of pulled me away. And so at that time, I was what they call Relief Society president. So it was like the women's organization, which, by the way, it's the men's organization for women. It's not a women's organization.
Mhm.
And so because I was president, I had this leadership position. And so I showed up for an early morning meeting before the 3-hour church block. And I was saying, and I mentioned to them, hey, so this person who moved in, he like he was making me uncomfortable. And I also noticed a group of the men noticing that I was uncomfortable and not saying anything. And I understand that not everyone has the tools to like intervene in a situation, but I really think that it'd be a good idea to just kind of have like some sort of basic understanding and awareness. I wouldn't even go so far as to call it training, but just like basic awareness of when to step in and like when someone's uncomfortable.
Or basic human fucking decency,
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
come on.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So they shot me down. I remember the guy who was like the president of the men's group was like, "Well, we don't want to turn people against him." Immediately. So like forget me and forget all the other women. And I was still and like I actually remember also mentioning like I also think maybe we should let the sisters know, like let the women know, and that's when they were like, well, we don't want to tell people against them. So they shot me down my idea of like training the men how to be basic fucking
Wow.
humans. And then
Wow.
they also shut my idea down of warning those sisters, the women, because quote unquote, they don't want to turn people against them. So that
Wow.
was May. Yeah. And
Wow.
that doesn't sound like a big deal, right? And in that moment, it wasn't. But their reaction to my experience immediately was like, no, you're wrong. So that entire summer, this man continued to follow me around the church, continued, like waiting outside of the bathroom for me, waiting outside of the classes for me, waiting outside of like this morning meetings, like waiting outside for me. And then I was like, no, like, no. One thing that I do want to kind of acknowledge is that he has some sort of developmental delay, but it was, I want to say, mild,
Okay.
or, so like, and this is something that he had learned to weaponize.
Uh,
Yeah, towards the end of the summer, he would want to give me a hug, and I was adamantly like, I didn't want to give him a hug. First of all, like, why do I owe anybody a hug? And I couldn't quite pinpoint it, but he didn't want a friendly hug. He wanted to rub his dick up against me.
wow.
Like that's basically what it was. Like,
Yeah.
and I just couldn't, like, I didn't have the words for it at the time. I didn't recognize what was happening. I just knew that I didn't want this man touching me.
Oh,
And, and so like, this kept on escalating and escalating. And remember I mentioned that I used to go to church like all the freaking time. So it would got to the point that like it had gotten to the point where if there was like an event that like immediately the first thing he would do was look for me, like always like making me uncomfortable, all up in my space,
that's
following me.
terrifying.
Yes,
And this is someone that, like a stranger that you've never connected with prior to coming to this church, right?
it was somebody that was like in a different region of the
Right.
the Mormon group, but
But you
like
guys never crossed paths before.
exactly, yes,
Wow.
exactly. So this is somebody who like just randomly got fixated on me,
Oh
and
my God.
so yeah, and so like here's the thing: some of the other men, like they thought it was funny, like, oh, we gotta go save Carla from Ricky, or like we gotta take Carla we gotta walk her to her car so Ricky doesn't bother her. But they said it like it was fucking like a joke, and it
Wow.
wasn't. And here's
I
the
just
other.
want to pause real quick. You're okay with saying his name?
Oh yeah, fuck that guy.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, fucking no, it's fine. I just want to make sure.
Sorry. Thank you.
Yo, I love that. I hope you know I'm keeping that.
Thank you.
Fuck that guy. Yes, I
Yeah.
need that on a t-shirt. I need that on this hat.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah, okay.
100% okay. Yeah.
Continue. Yes. Fuck you, Ricky.
Seriously, fuck Ricky. Yeah. So, like we gotta save Carla from Ricky. And one of the things that really bothered me about that is that it was being minimized, that nobody saw how distressful it was, that people were telling me, like, Carla, can't you just be his friend? Or that he would then, like, if I was like, kind of keeping him at arm's distance and they didn't want to give him a hug, then he'd like go cry. Like, this is what I'm telling you, that this is like he had like weaponized his disability. And
And
he's like,
you were now the problem.
exactly. I was the wicked bitch of the West
Yeah,
who
yeah,
didn't want to be friends with him
yeah.
and didn't want to give him a hug. And I'm like, I'm sorry. Like, why do I have to let myself be sexually assaulted by this man?
Yes.
Absolutely disgusting. And so, no, like, and again, I didn't have these terms at the time. I just knew I didn't want to give him a hug. I just knew that he felt predatory and that he was fixated on me and nobody was taking it seriously. And I remember even there was a couple of men in the room, like in the congregation, that like would always come sit next to me to kind of like shoo him away. And as much as I appreciated that, it always felt like they had like ulterior motives. They were like, oh, if I, like quote unquote protect Carla from Ricky, then she'll want to go on a date with me. Which like also was like so upsetting, but also
Yeah.
like I would like, no, I'm not gonna date you, but also yes, stay next to me so that guy doesn't come. Like
Yeah.
it was just so upsetting, so
It's like a
upsetting.
losing battle for you. It's a lose-lose situation.
Yeah, it absolutely was. And so this had
Yeah.
like escalated. He was leaving me calls and voicemails, calling my friends, saying like, why doesn't Carla want to be friends with me?
Oh my
Like,
God.
yeah, it was so bad. Like my cheeks are getting red just like thinking about this.
Yeah.
And then again, it was all in the summer. And then finally in August, I remember I was in that meeting for like the quote unquote leadership of my congregation. It was a relatively small office, And this man had gotten to the point that he knew I'd be in that meeting, so he'd barge in to see if I was there. So yeah, and so like Sunday after Sunday after Sunday would be happening. And so this one time I was like, I'm not doing this. So what I did is I kind of stood on the other side of the door so that when because the door opened inward, so when you open the door, I wouldn't be sitting right next to it and he wouldn't see me. But what he did was he opened the door all the way in and came inside and turned.
Oh,
And so, yeah. And so he is now in the center of this like small office and I'm against the wall. So I have the wall on one side, a chair on the other, and like the door on the other. Like I have nowhere to go.
Oh my God, you're
And
trapped. Jesus Christ. I see it in my head and it's freaking me the fuck out.
yeah. And yes, me too. Like I was trapped, but I wasn't alone. There were other people there.
Wow.
And this man still came. And like again, I'm not sure. I'm not like a physically small person. And I was wearing heels, and like the fact that I can still like feel him towering over me. And he was coming so close in my personal space. Like, Carla, why don't you want to be friends with me? I just want to be like, I just want to give you a hug, like this and that. And I remember I had to like put my arm away. Like put my like I'm like for those who can't see, like I'm extending my arm outward and I'm opening my palm. And so like that was the most space I could create, but he was still pushing back. Like this is like a huge, huge man and he's still pushing back. And I'm here like, and he's just like mumbling all these nonsense.
And hold on, in a fucking room with people and no one is intervening or stepping in and being like, hey, respect her fucking boundary. Like, what the fuck is wrong with these people?
Exactly. So that's what it was. And so when I was there, and it was not like it was a long time. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it probably wasn't like 10 minutes, but it was not like 5 seconds either.
It felt like it, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm like pushing this man away because I have nowhere to fucking go. Like I'm trapped against the wall. And finally somebody was like, "Oh, come here, Ricky, let's go. Let's go." Kind of like finally gets off his ass and like walks him out. And then I was just there in the room shaking, like completely shaking, and I kind of just didn't say anything because I was just in that room like shaking. I don't remember immediately what they said, but I remember it was very upsetting because I was like, oh, these fucking people. But then at the end, one of the guys who was there was like, Carla, if you hadn't stood there, he wouldn't have done that. And I promise you, I left that room crying. Like like running and crying. Like I completely lost it. Like I was already shaken up. And I was like, let me like finish this meeting. But for one of them to say, if you hadn't stood there, he wouldn't have done that. Like basically, this is your fault.
Yeah.
Like, fuck you, guy. You know, like I left. Like I was like running. And here's the thing, like in that room, it was mostly men because Mormon leadership is men. There was 2 other women there, but they were like 19-year-old Mormon missionaries from Utah who had like never stepped foot.
What the fuck are they gonna do? Yeah.
Exactly. So like I really don't like I could imagine why they didn't, I can understand. But like some of the men who were there were like men in their 40s and 50s in quote unquote leadership positions, and they're watching me be like harassed after culminations of like months of like stalking and like invading like my personal space and like trying to like not be sexually harassed by this man who wants to like rub his dick up against me, and like under the guise of I just want a hug, and so when they said that I left like running, like I was running. I mean, it's running fast as you can run in high heels, like I was like trying to hold it together. Like I just need to go, trying to hold it together. And here's the thing, my sense of like responsibility or whatnot, we were having like a potluck or something. I stop by the kitchen, which is next to the women's room, by the way. That's one of the more oppressive structures of Mormonism, but that's for another podcast. And I talked to someone and I was like, hey, I bought this brownies. Just make sure you put them in the oven. And then I went to my car and I drove away sobbing.
Right.
I was like, really stop and say like,
you still got to make sure everything, the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed before. Yeah. Wow. I'm so sorry that I know there's probably way more scenarios that you experience, but I don't want to focus too much on like re-triggering your trauma when it comes to that. But I do appreciate you for sharing that experience because, you know, so many people deal with so many different types of abuse. And I think stalking and like invading your personal space, that is very uncomfortable. Like, I'm a person, like, I'm not, when it comes to love languages, like physical touch is the last one on the list. Don't fucking touch me unless I invite you to, right? So I could only imagine how uncomfortable that was. And then just to be surrounded in a space where people are seeing your suffering, that's what I'm gonna name it as. Like, you are suffering in this, and there's just like, oh, okay, like just a fucking normal interaction that's not normal at all. So I just want to, give you your space and hold space for you to be like, I'm so sorry that you experienced that, and I so appreciate you for wanting to talk about it. So I want to focus now on like you walking away from the church. We don't have to go into like the full in-depth story, but like, what was that process like for you, and was there any pushback from you deciding to be like, no fucking more, I'm not doing this. I see this for what it is, and I'm not subscribing to this bullshit that you guys are putting out there.
Yeah, no, 100%. And thank you so much for sharing,
Yeah.
for like holding space. I appreciate it. And yeah, like, obviously that was like the I want to say the catalyst that had me like running away
Yeah.
crying, because it wasn't just like this like very physically threatening moment. It was also the fact that they all sat around there watching me, did nothing, and then had the audacity to blame me.
Mm.
So the thing is that I had already, at that point, I'd already kind of been struggling with some of the principles of Mormonism and kind of really like taking a look around. So this is 2017, right?
You
So
know.
we're like into the first year of the Trump administration. And I was like, how can these people vote for someone who is so anti Christ like,
Yeah.
like who is so like, I was just so confused. And I'm like this is not somebody who follows the teachings of Christ, and how can so many people in the Mormon church support him? So it
Yeah.
was already kind of very starting to like distance myself from that. But when that happened, here's the thing. I still wanted to remain in the church. I still wanted to be part of the Mormon church. The reason that I remember that it was August, it was like the Sunday before I started grad school, and then we had Hurricane Irma. And so I
Um,
kind of had like almost 2 months of like not showing up to church and no one really noticing, because because it was like a hurricane and church was canceled, and I was like, oh, I have class on Sunday, so but I was so conflicted internally. I actually, and one of my core values is speaking truth to power. I went back to like the branch president, and I was like, just so you know, like I set up a meeting with him. I remember there was like hurricane relief boxes everywhere. And I was like, listen, the fact that you all stood there, that makes me know that this is not an environment where I, no, nor any other woman is safe.
yeah.
And the fact that you all blame me, that makes me know that if I were to be raped in the parking lot, you
Mhm.
would all ask me, why were you there?
What did you do? Yep.
Right, exactly. And I told him that.
Good for
And
you.
thank you. And like
Yeah.
whatever, like that man probably doesn't remember that conversation, but I was like, I am not going to like sit here and like not tell you about yourself.
Right.
So yeah, so like this is what I told to like, like the congregational leadership. But remember how we talked about like the geographical areas and how I was with the single adults? I was like, let me try to go to church with my mom. And even still, like being on the building, like it was still, because it was a different building, different church location, it wasn't
Mhm.
as triggering. But I was like, oh, like all these people,
Yeah.
like they all were like protecting him. And then like, that was like, so all of that fall, like that, from like August to January, February, I was still trying to be Mormon. Remember,
Well,
like I built my entire life, my identity around this. And
yeah.
and that's the other thing that Mormons teach you, that the church is perfect, that people aren't. So I was like, oh, maybe
No, no.
it's just him. So again, definitely a cult. But I remember
Yes.
towards March of 2018, I had this realization that like I realized that Mormons believe in like polygamy in the eternal world. Like that is a
Mm.
doctrine. Like when men die, they get to marry multiple women. And I was like, right, exactly. Isn't that ludicrous? And I was like, this
What?
exactly. I was like, what? So I was just like, no. So I remember thinking like, this can't be true. And not true as in like true or false, but like true as in like the truth, the word of
Right.
God. I was like, this
Right.
can't be the truth. And I was like, and if this isn't true, then none of it is. And then I
Mm,
just had like this peace wash over me, like
mm.
so much peace. And I remember thinking, and I was like, if the God I was raised to believe in really does exist and he really does know my heart and my mind, then he's going to know why I need to walk away.
Yep.
And that's
Wow.
what gave me the peace. Yes, that's
Wow. Snaps to that. Yes. Yes, for using your voice to take your power back. That is something that I stand 10 toes down on. Like, I scream that from the mountaintops. You know, while our experiences are complete polar opposites, we both have been able to find ourselves and heal through speaking up and saying no fucking more. I'm not taking this shit from you, whether it's a church, whether it's a shitty relationship, whether it's that toxic work environment and that micromanaging boss that treating you like shit day in and day out. Like, eventually you get to the point that like the straw broke the camel's back and it's like enough is enough, right? So I want to ask you, going public with this is not easy. So I commend you, girl. I give you your flowers, because talking about church hurt, a lot of people are triggered by this, right? What made you want to, like, publicly on a platform, and with your podcast too, bringing this to the forefront, and how has that aided your own healing from what you experienced?
Yeah, thank you so much. So the first thing I want to say is that when I told my mom that I was leaving Mormonism, she said, "Oh, but promise me you'll never talk crap about the church." Because that's one
Wow.
of the things that the Mormons like. It really is a freaking cult, man. Like
Yeah. They
they
just want
they
to
t-
oppress you and keep you
exactly,
quiet. Yeah.
yeah, and they tarnish. Like if you say even the slightest fact that is against their like version of reality, they're like, oh, she's anti now, like
Right.
anti-Mormon. And so
Right.
my mom was like, just promise me you'll never say anything, like any, I'll just promise me you'll never talk crap about the church. And I was like, sure, mom. So, I don't even know when that was. Sometime that summer of 2018. So it was like a year
Mhm.
removed of that situation. A few months later, I was in grad school, remember? So I was like in school, I was, like I was working and I get a call from a random number and it's Ricky.
Oh
And I
shit.
freaked out. This is like a year and a half later. And I was like, how? And then this time around, I was like, absolutely not.
Fine.
Absolutely not. I'm going to pin on this from when he
Yeah.
called me because a lot of my family were still Mormon. And I
Um,
knew that he was still harassing other women. And I knew that they were not putting a stop to it and that they were protecting him.
mm,
So that's kind of in the background. I was so pissed, but again, that's me. And like they were all telling me like, but that really wasn't a big deal. Like he was just
right.
trying to give you a hug. He was just trying to whatever. So like, then in December 2018 when he called me and then I hung up and then I got a voicemail from him, I was like, absolutely not.
Wow.
I went to like the congregational like Facebook group and I was like, hey everyone, so as some of you know, like this and this happened last year. Like I've since been removed from your space, like I'm staying away. But today he called me
Oh,
and 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 I because I worked at the University of Miami at the time, and it's like easily accessible via public transit. I was like, this man is gonna come fucking find me, and like I'm gonna be alone on campus. Like I was like, absolutely not. So I posted that in the group, and I
mm,
was like, I just please ask you that if he asks about me, just tell him you don't know anything about me. Just please don't give him my phone number. That's all I'm asking. So that's what I posted on the Facebook group. And you know what those motherfuckers did? They deleted my post and removed me from the group. Yes!
no.
I know. So when that happened, I was like, oh, you pissed off the wrong person.
Wow.
Because up until that moment, I was still not acknowledging the fact of what had happened to me and how the
Right.
Mormon church had protected him. But when I literally just asked, don't tell him anything about me and don't give him my phone number, that they removed the post and then removed me from the group. I was like, oh no. Oh, so that was like the first time that I was like publicly posting about it. Before I did, just another thing that the way that I advocated for myself is I
Yeah.
called campus public safety. Like that motherfucker told me,
Yeah.
oh well, like all he did was leave you a voicemail. I was like,
Wow.
the police, Anyway, so, but I was like, again, absolutely not. Like, I am not
Yeah.
going to be vulnerable. I wrote a long ass email. I sent it to my boss. I sent it to my other boss. I sent it to my department head, and I CC'd my therapist. I emailed like 5 or 6 people, and I was like, this is happening. He is contacting me on campus. I'm gonna need all of you to know that I'm being stalked and harassed, and to like pay attention to me. I don't
Wow.
actually remember what that email said, but I was like, hey, this is happening. Like, I'm not going to deal with this alone this time.
Yeah.
So that was the first thing that I did. I sent an email asking for help from like my support system, or at least the people on campus that had some sort of, awareness that I existed or that I reported to. Then
Right.
the next day was when I posted the thing, and when I saw that they removed it. So then that was when I was like, oh, fuck no. So this is when I first told my story publicly, and it was just on my Facebook group. And I got so many messages from I got all sorts of random messages. I got messages from like cult members telling me like, Carla, you need to get down on your knees and pray to God. From like, shut
Oh,
the fuck
Jesus
up.
Christ.
Yeah, exactly.
Go fuck yourself, Ricky.
Exactly. Yeah. So I got some of those messages. I got other messages saying, Carla, I'm sorry that happened to you, but that's no reason to leave the church.
Wow.
Yeah. And then I started getting other messages.
Well,
Hey, the same thing happened to me with that guy.
yeah.
Hey, they managed it the same way. Hey, I remember somebody, like the first time that I realized that something actually had happened to me that I didn't want to put a name to it, is when people were commenting like, you need an attorney and the police. And I was like, really?
Yeah.
But like that was the first time. And I remember one of the most beautiful messages that I got. It was somebody I went to high school with that I had like one class in high school with. So I was living in Miami. And she was like, hey, Carla, I know we haven't talked in a while, but I just wanted to let you know that if you need a place to stay, you can always come to my house.
Wow.
Oh, that was so beautiful. Like, like huge shout out to her. Like when I finally got my wits about me, like, because it was a lot of messages, and not only do I get overwhelmed with messages in general, like just was a lot of messages,
Right.
but I still think that was one of the kindest things somebody ever did for me. Just like,
Wow.
just
Because that
sending
was
me
the
this.
first time that like you had validation and you were able to be like, my experience actually matters, because throughout this entire process, they've been minimizing you. They've been shunning you. They've been, gaslighting you in a way,
Yes.
to make you feel like your reality is not what you think it to be, and you're over exaggerating, quote unquote. And so for you to have that external validation that, as humans, I think we all want in some way, shape, or form, it can get unhealthy if that's all that you long for, right? But to have someone just see you and understand you and be like, oh my God, me too, or to like your high school friend, shout out to her for offering up you this sense of safety that you weren't feeling for so long, right? And then just to have outside people when you were in the church to be like just standing around and basically watching you get assaulted. Like that must have been such a freeing feeling for you. So I appreciate you for, talking about that. And that's what I stand on so much. Like just talk about the shit that you've gone through. You don't need to do it on a public platform like, on Facebook or starting a podcast, but like just allowing someone else to hear what you've gone through. More likely than not, the feedback is going to be positive. Of course, there's trolls, that's something that you can't avoid, but more often than not, people are going to be able to recognize themselves in your experience. And that comes with the healing of putting it out there for people to be like, damn, me too. Or damn, I'm so sorry that happened to you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And yeah, so thank you so much. And that's actually, like I shared in the beginning that like my cheeks are red and my heart was racing. I was talking to my partner before logging on. And I was like, like I have a podcast interview and she's going to ask me about all that stuff. And he was like, why'd you agree to do it? And I said, because every time I talk about it, people message me saying the same thing happened to me, the same thing happened to my sister. And then, I mean, the same thing happened to my sister, the same thing happened to my cousins. Every time I talk about this
Yeah.
publicly,
Yeah.
I get those messages. And this is why. And so his response was so funny. He was just like, so that's why you're doing it. He's like,
Yes.
why'd you do it? And he's like, all right,
Duh.
that's why.
Hello.
So yeah, like, and it
Yeah.
is. And for me, it was really important that even though I initially shared that from this place of like, oh no, you didn't just try to silence me when I
Yeah.
asked you for the bare fucking minimum.
Yeah.
Throughout this entire time, I kept my promise to my mom that I was never going to quote unquote like trash talk the church.
Yeah.
But I asked you for the bare minimum and you try to silence me. And I was like, And so then, a few years later, started my coaching practice, started my podcast. And this happened in August of 2017, that major, catalytic event. So it's like, I want to talk about it, because it does impact how I show up at work. It does
Yeah.
impact how I show up in my everyday life. Like, I am
Uh-huh.
hyper aware. For over a year, I was seeing this man everywhere.
Yeah.
Like, it was, I mean, obviously it wasn't him, but I was like, oh my God, is that him? Like, I would have to do a double take and like look over my shoulders. So yeah, like talking about it and speaking your truth and like having, like, letting yourself acknowledge and putting a name to what happened, there is a lot of power in that.
So, since we're on that, for anyone who's listening or watching and has some sort of similarity to your story, whether it's the stalking, whether it's the harassment, whether it's just any type of uncomfortableness that they feel, especially when it comes to being in their church, whatever organized group that is, and they're scared to speak out. They're scared to advocate for themselves like you did, but they have that feeling inside that they want to. What is a piece of advice you would tell them?
Trust yourself. Trust yourself, because even if you can't name what it is about a situation that's wrong or what it is about a situation that is unsafe, there's a part of you that knows. There's that inner wisdom, that inner knowledge. And even if you can't name it, trust yourself.
Yeah.
And then the other piece of advice is that your religious leaders are unfortunately not equipped. The kind way to say this is that they're not equipped to handle these situations. The another way to that is also true is that the religious leaders are there to protect the good name of the church. They're there to protect the organization. They're not there to protect you. So if you feel like something is wrong, even like everything, especially if you grew up in a cult like me, or if you grew up in like a high demand religion, you might be feeling like you have to turn to your religious leader, but go outside. Find a group that you feel comfortable with that can give you that objective opinion. Because whether intentionally or not, your religious leaders are most likely to gaslight you. That's what happened to me. And that's what happens. Again, every time I talk about this, somebody says the same thing happened to me. And my friends who watch me go through this, my friends who are not Mormon, I introduced them to a different, to a friend of mine who is also a survivor of something even worse within the Mormon church. And as she was telling her story, she said, that is the exact same story Carla shared. And
Wow.
so again, if you are in a high demand religion or even in a different setting and you're feeling like something is wrong, first of all, trust yourself. And second of all, seek outside help.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that pertains to all aspects of our life, right? Like advocacy for yourself, leaning on support, knowing that you don't have to go through this alone. And if there's people in your life who are not trying to see you win in a sense, or like trying to help you get through what you're going through, it's time for a different circle, honey. And sometimes that means cutting off friendships that have been in your life for decades. Sometimes that means getting out of that shitty fucking job that you've been at for umpteenth years, but you're just staying because it's comfortable. And no, your mental health, your safety, your sanity, your peace should be top priority. And you got to get to the point that like you got to put yourself first, babe. Like you fucking matter at the end of the day. The relationship that we spend the most time with is with who?
With
Us.
ourselves. Yeah.
That's it, right? So you don't want to be living this miserable existence when you do have the choice and you do have the autonomy over yourself to be like, no, enough is a fucking enough, and I'm going to make the shift regardless of the outside noise that's going to come. especially when it comes to the church. We already know a lot of people are going to talk shit. A lot of people are going to shun you. A lot of people are going to be like, you're going to fucking hell because you're going against what God wants. Fuck you. Okay. That's what I say
Yeah.
to that. I'm doing what matters for me, for my peace, for my safety. And if that doesn't agree with you, so fucking be it. Because at the end of the day, I fucking matter. Period. Point blank. Okay.
Yeah,
Permission
absolutely.
to offend.
Yes, I love it, love it. And I just want to reiterate, like one of the things that you said, like some people will shun you, some
Yeah.
people will like turn their backs on you.
Yeah.
100%. One of the reasons why I debated staying in Mormonism, even like 6, 7 months after this whole shit went down, is that I remember thinking like, I don't want people to think I'm leaving Mormonism just because of what happened with that
No.
guy. So like even me was minimizing my own experience because first of all, like even if I left Mormonism just because of what happened, that's still a valid reason.
Yeah.
But like my disaffiliation, I talked about it on the podcast. There was a lot of doctrinal inconsistencies. And I remember feeling so sad that I basically had no friends. And I was
Yeah.
like, you weren't actually friends with me. We
Yeah.
were just in proximity to each other. You don't care about me as a person. You only care about me as a project or as a number. I used to get so mad when people would text me on Sundays, like, hey, I miss you. And I'm like, no, you don't. You're sitting in church taking attendance.
Yeah.
You don't see me and you're sending me a text.
Yeah.
So, but again, like at the end of the day, like you matter and you
Yeah.
matter more than all of those people that are in your life just because of proximity.
Yeah,
You matter.
for sure. And it's definitely a grieving process that you have to go through, right? When it comes to those major life changes, like that will pass too. Like, yes, it's going to feel shitty in the beginning, but it's not going to last like that forever. And that gives you the opportunity to make new choices and surround yourself in healthier environments that are going to help you grow and elevate and thrive. Right. So
Yes,
perfect,
thrive.
perfect segue to the last question I want to ask you before you plug in how people can work with you in your podcast. What's your definition of thriving? And what is the biggest takeaway you want people to have by listening to just a piece of your story?
Yeah. Oh, love that. So when I think of both parts of that question, I think of my houseplants. So you see there have some houseplants behind you. So I think to me, like thriving is not getting, but like having access and getting your own access to what you need to like to shine, to be the version of yourself that you want to be.
Yeah.
Like yeah, your favorite version of yourself doesn't have to be your best version of yourself. Sometimes you can go take a nap, whatever, but you're kind of taking naps. So
Right.
I think of that, and I think of my plants. Like when I moved, some of my plants died because this wasn't the right environment for
Yes.
them.
Ooh.
But some of my plants are thriving now because this is the right environment for them. And so to me, it's just like I guess that's what thriving means to me is just being in the right environment for you where you can flourish, when you can be your favorite version of yourself and it feels natural, it feels joyous. And even when there are growing pains, it's still beautiful. And
Yes.
that's what, and that's what I would want someone to take away just from this little piece of my story is that not every environment is for you. You know, you can just
Ooh.
put yourself in a new environment.
Mic drop. Bow, 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 bow. Yo, I need you to say that one more time because I think it went over some people's heads. Say that last part one more time.
Not every environment is for you.
On that note, I mean, there's so much more that I want to get into, but that's another conversation for another day. I really, once again, appreciate you so much for coming on and having this really difficult taboo conversation, talking about church, religion, politics, even. That's the shit, like that's the trifecta that you don't talk about, right? But
Yep.
you are taking a stance, you are taking your power back, you are letting other people know I fucking matter. And at the end of the day, if that upsets anyone, I don't care because it's just me. I fucking matter. Period. Point blank. Right. So I just want to say thank you so much. Please talk about your podcast, the First Gen Coach podcast. And I know you have coaching that you help. You're a career coach, so I want you to talk a little bit about that and how people can work with you and follow you and plug in anything else that you want to leave the people with.
Yes, thank you so much. So I am a career coach and I help first gen women job hop their way to six figures. So get their, first six-figure job and, like doing it while protecting their peace, like doing it while taking days off from work guilt free, doing it while protecting their boundaries. So I've helped my clients increase their salaries by over $450,000 now. And
Yes.
even people that haven't worked with me, but that just come to my workshops, like they're like, Carla, I got this job, because I did what you told me to do. So I just really, really love. I love career coaching. I firmly believe that every woman of color out there, especially like Latina, especially Black and Brown women, can go and make an additional $30,000 and still be underpaid. So this is why I do what I do. So, I work with clients one-on-one for 6 months, and I also do workshops for, like ERGs or like employee resource groups, colleges. So, you can all find that in my link in bio, or you can just check the firstgencoach.com/welcome. You can find me on Instagram at Carla the First Gen Coach, or on my podcast at the First Gen Coach Podcast.
Yes, so we're gonna link all her info in the show notes. I love seeing a Latina taking up space and paving the way for others to do the same, and just for you to be able to turn a really shitty moment in your life into your purpose. I know this coincides with how you show up in coaching, how you show up in, like you said, your just day-to-day life, and you're just inspiring so many. And I just, again, I want to say thank you so much for being so candid and vulnerable. It's not easy to talk about this shit, but it's these types of conversations that heal and that empower others to do the same. So thank you, Carla, for being here today. I appreciate you so, so much.
Thank you so much, Leanna. Thank you. Huge shout out to you for this podcast, this
Thank you.
community that you've created, this reminder that no matter what, we are going to thrive. So just thank you so, so much.
Yes, honey. Thank you. Thank you. Until next time, guys, please leave a rating and review on both of our podcasts. Us podcasters, we need those reviews in Apple. And let us know the biggest takeaway from this conversation. Let us know if you could relate to Carla's story and reach out to her. Her DMs are always open. My DMs are always open. And until next time, keep glowing, growing, and thriving.